Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the 22nd edition of the FreeFuse Sessions interviews. I am your host, the CEO and one of the co-founders of FreeFuse, a multipath media platform which is here to help you communicate in a much more personalized way. In today's session, I have a very special guest, Dietrich von Bidenfeld. Dietrich is a professor at the University of Houston. He was selected to a tenure track position as an assistant professor of business in 2017 and selected that same year to serve as assistant department chair of the department housing his two disciplines and marketing. Research interests include legal, regulatory, economic, sustainability, and supply cycle concerns for water rights, procurement, compliance, ethics, and leadership topics. Dietrich recently concluded his fifth term as mayor pro tem on West Columbia, Texas City Council, and was appointed associate municipal judge. He is Governor Abbott's representative on the Public Transportation Advisory Committee and was previously a state Senate confirmed appointee of Governor Rick Perry. He serves on numerous regional, state, and international boards and committees, including the West Houston Association and Australian American Chamber of Commerce. He also accesses his 3 law licenses to provide pro bono legal representation for veterans across the nation. Dietrich is a frequently consulted business, legal, and supply cycle subject matter expert. And when he isn't volunteering in the community, researching, or teaching, he can be seen in the media, on Fox News, and at local breweries. So without further ado, that was hopefully a great introduction. So I'm going to pass the baton to you, Dietrich. And if you want to give any further context about yourself, now's the time to go ahead and do so.
Right. Well, I think a lot of my life story involves the German saying, man plans, God laughs. I was told since I was around 4 years old that I would be an attorney. I, at different points, wanted to be an architect, a pediatrician, and an engineer. And here I am, an attorney. But it's interesting how that's worked. And I try to translate some of those lessons and some of the areas where service to others has created a benefit for myself. We know that a rising tide lifts all boats. And similarly, I found that a lot of my civic participation and honors and accolades and opportunities to travel internationally to present at conferences, to be asked for by name by national media sources, which is very flattering for someone to call and say, we want to talk to Dietrich. A lot of that came or derived from my work in service to others. So, for example, my work on city council, my 10 years and 5 terms as mayor pro tem was actually due to my submitting an offer to the city to help with grant writing. There was a call for grant writer volunteers, and I said, well, I'm pretty proficient in contract review, grant writing, grant interpretation. I'll help with that. And that led to the mayor calling me and saying, actually, we have somebody who's retiring from council. We'd like for you to meet him. And he said, oh, I'm very happy to retire if you're going to run for the seat. So I ended up getting the honor of serving our community on city council because I was volunteering my time and expertise in a much less visible, less prestigious, but very valuable area of grant writing. So that's a little bit of my life story that translates throughout the gubernatorial appointments and other service areas where I walked into a room basically offering to help with one thing, and then somebody said, oh, we need you to do this.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic story. I think that being able to, really draw from our life experiences and, be able to serve others is always a really important aspect of what we do. And so, you've had so much experience in so many of these different places. And I've, obviously checked out some of the information that you provide to some of the, local news broadcasts and some of the work you've done there. And I've always been really curious about, you've had a constant conversation about things like inflation, for example, or you've had constant conversations about other things. So I was really actually curious, when you're actually, going on and preparing information maybe for clients that you work with or people that, you're, kind of going on an interview show with as it pertains to some of the financial aspects, whether it's macroeconomics or maybe even an individual business that you're consulting with. How is it that you actually prepare to serve them? And what are some of the common things that you're seeing maybe out there in the world today that people should actually be aware of in the macroeconomic environment?
Right. I mean, the preparation really for me involves uh, filtering a lot of information and resources that I have and making it into something that is not only digestible, so chunking, which is also a pedagogical technique, and then saying, okay, what's most relevant? So that prioritization or creating hierarchies of importance, another leadership aspect that I draw upon. And then using language that is easily identifiable. So we often think about vernacular in terms of geographical language, not just other countries. So Brazilians speak Portuguese, Colombians speak Spanish, Northerners say soda or pop. In Texas, we often say Coke. But then industry wide, we see where language and vernacular are distinguishable. And a common example I use to illustrate this for my students is if you get a letter from the SEC, are you happy or sad, right? And it just depends. If you're a college athlete, yay. The Southeastern Conference, the greatest conference in the football, college collegiate football realm, has reached out to you. If you are a business owner or corporate compliance officer, maybe the Securities and Exchange Commission isn't an entity that you want to receive a letter from. So I try to break down some of those areas of misconception, making sure that I define what acronyms mean that I'm using, distinguishing between say the Bureau of Printing and Engraving and the U.S. Mint, right? There are differences in these, even the simple aspects of producing tangible money products. And then I kind of think about the fact of the time frame. So radio and TV media have really helped me to filter and try to be as concise as possible in the delivery of a message. My students really appreciate that because before, where I might have a very long-winded, multiple analogy drawing upon story, now I'm kind of like, okay, here are the highlights. What don't you understand that I can delve into for or expound upon? But otherwise, here's the 30,000 foot view of what we're talking about. And so that's kind of the prep process. Again, drawing on a lot of reading that I do, not just for my work, but as a hobby. So the nice thing about my profession is my hobbies align with my professional needs, including reading and traveling. And then I also draw upon my roles. So a lot of people don't realize that, for example, serving on a gubernatorial in a gubernatorial appointment capacity, I get legislative clippings. What are legislative clippings? They're excerpts from newspapers around the state and around the world that I'm not subscribed to. I probably couldn't afford this many subscriptions that I wouldn't have time to read. Sort of a backstory: when I was in college, I loved the Wall Street Journal, and I was regularly discovering things that were about 2 weeks behind schedule because I would read cover to cover. And by the time you get through with that, between classes, and I was at school in New Orleans, so the social activities, I was always behind. I could never get through the entire thing that I wanted to read to actually be current on what was going on. And so the governor's office then takes excerpts of relevant and sort of the highlights of the day, Dallas Morning News, Washington Post, New York Times, and they send them to you in an email and a PDF. And so you've got 30 pages of very spot on, well written, pre vetted content, and I can go from there on. So there's some benefits to the behind the scenes information and resources I get to do my civic service better. City council reports such as analysis of the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, or cost of living adjustment information so that we can analyze employee pay rates. That information is then filtered through an accounting or auditing firm and then comes to me in my counsel role, and I'm able to derive other information from that, plus the educational aspects of my legal training, historical training, and a lot of people miss this. I also have degrees in sociology and postgraduate work in sociology, so human behavior in aggregate. So a lot of economics is understanding consumer behavior, not just the tangible aspects of the commodities exchange and saying, okay, this is what pepper is going for today. It's also, are people peppering their food more than they did 5 years ago? Are people actually translating certain cooking methodologies or health advice into their practices in the kitchen that then translate into information about grocery purchases? So all of that comes into the play in the digestion. And so I encourage people to look at, in the macro world, um, those key areas of your market basket that people cannot do without. How long can you actually go without water? How long can you go without food? It's great to talk about gold. It's a multifaceted resource in the industry, where you can use it in electronics, you can use it in jewelry. Those are very interesting and somewhat valuable, pun intended, resources to really examine in their impact on and reflection of inflation policies, consumer confidence, and so forth. However, at the end of the day, food, natural gas for heating, natural gas for electricity, for cooling in these record temperatures, water, those are things that we also need to really examine in our economic outlook to say, where are these things being used? When we think about the state of Hawaii experiencing forest fires, oh, that's all the way over there. How does this impact me? Well, it's an island set. So there isn't a lot of potable water just coming out of artesian wells in Hawaii. How many things are flown in? And if there is a preference or some sort of priority given to FEMA supplies of water, how does that impact things? There's a parallel there to our Strategic National Petroleum Reserve, as we draw down on that to artificially keep fuel prices low, despite what OPEC Plus may sort of deal with as far as capacity and output projections and decisions. These are things in the macro world that people need to be watching. People need to be paying attention to other areas. We are truly a global economy, and just like the butterfly effect, where the small butterfly wings could translate to a typhoon somewhere else. Natural gas provisions, sanctions against Russia, right? As winter comes, one of the major consumers of natural gas for heating elements of Gazprom and Russian state natural gas was Germany, the largest economy in the European Union, right? So as they try to find alternative fuel sources with their economic parity, purchasing power, there aren't a lot of countries with that parity of purchasing power. And so how does that translate into challenges for less wealthy countries to get access to natural gas when Germany is able to pay a premium to get it? And then so there's this very not only interrelated, but then trickle down effect of economic demand, and of course those essentials such as water, food, and even cooling and heating.
Yeah, and you know what? All of what you said is so fascinating, right? Because there's this interconnected web of everything. And there is, for example, when you think about the micro, which is the individual customer, right? And something, you and I share as being, I think, very well read. I read a lot of things as it pertains to my own hobbies, and my hobbies actually translate into useful things that actually go into our company. Because if you ever talk to any of the folks who work with us, I literally sit there and I'm just like churning out information and snippets from books that I'm reading as well. And it always translates, right? And, one of the things that I've found is it's so fascinating to think about an individual, customer's buying journey, especially since we're B2B. And there's an initial like aspect to that consumer psychology, right? And I've been spending a lot of time in the last 6 or 8 weeks, really researching and understanding the psychology behind it, right? Then there's everything from how you package something, how you talk about something, all the way to who are you actually talking to, what is it that actually goes into that journey. And then if you think about it, when you get enough of those people, now you have a market, right? And so now you're actually cultivating an entire group of people and their preferences and how you're talking to them. And I think one of the most fascinating things to me, obviously, especially for us being, a company that's obviously been built in the last few years, it's one of those interesting things to try and get people's heads wrapped around a new offering when it is so much different than what they're used to. The essential idea of creating a new market, right? So, for maybe some of the folks who are maybe starting their own new ideas, or maybe somebody who's looking to create an offering for an entirely new market, with your knowledge and understanding of macroeconomics and markets themselves, when someone's assessing that opportunity, right? How do you go about looking at that and seeing whether that's actually an opportunity or whether it's really just vaporware, right? Like it's not, really as much of an opportunity as that person might actually think.
Right. A lot of the assessment deals with needs analysis, and an area that I draw upon where sometimes people aren't aware of the other aspects of professions. I took a lot of courses in intellectual property, patents, trademarks, copyrights, but because I do not have a Bachelor of Science degree, I am not able to sit for the patent bar. So as I warn my students as well to know what the prerequisites are for a profession, because I would not have taken as many of these courses had I known that my interest in patents and other intellectual property would not be translated into a career where I could really make money in that arena. So intellectual property is one of the areas where I encourage people to look, do a patent search, do a trademark search, do a copyright search at the outset to see what else is already in this field. Because if somebody else has created something very similar and you really haven't heard about it, it means that maybe the market demand isn't there yet. Maybe the appetite for that good or service hasn't reached a threshold where the person who had that idea or something similar before really wasn't able to monetize it. They weren't able to find a way to capitalize on their ideas. And so that's an area that a lot of people miss. A lot of this information is public and readily accessible with simple search engines. With obviously, if you pay a lawyer, they can do a deeper dive and probably do a more efficient search. But if you're just starting out, you're trying to maximize your capital, check out those intellectual property at the USTR.gov, right? The U.S. Patent and Trade, USPTO, Patent and Trade Office.gov. Check out their website and go through and see if there's something similar. Another area that I look is market surveys. So there's Google, and then there's Google Scholar. So there are a number of academics who part of our job is research, and a little bit of it is gamesmanship. Let's be honest. We really probably don't need to spend $10 million to figure out that gummy bears are delicious, because to the people that like them, they are. And Haribo would stop manufacturing them if they weren't a profitable product. So clearly, to a large demographic, gummy bears are delicious. But we still have these research studies to validate things, to show the statistical probabilities and similar things. There is actually a value in that. Even in the redundancy and some of the gamesmanship of those productions. Google Scholar is a great resource to see where some of this market research has been done in similar areas, right? If you're talking about doing consultancy, engineering consultancy is different than actuarial consultancy, which is different than business development consultancy. But if you're able to see a research journal that shows where consultancies generally have been losing market share or profitability, that's an idea that you'd really want to draw on and be aware of when you're setting your price point for the services you have. And then from that broader search, you can then go to community members and say, hey, what is this need? And a parallel that I would draw, when I was younger and I would go on a trip somewhere, I would bring back a ton of souvenirs. I'd see something that was cool. It would be at a decent price point. It would be something transportable, right? High probability of making it in my luggage back to the United States. And I realized that my house is full of trinkets that really had no designated owner. What have I done since then? I try to only purchase things that have an intended recipient at the outset. So Stephen R. Covey's begin with the end in mind, even in these souvenir acquisitions where I'm like, you know what? This is a really cool spoon. It's sterling silver. It's $5. Who is this for? I don't need more junk at my house. So in that same analysis, as a burgeoning business, as a new entrepreneur, step out there and say, okay, who am I actually designing this for? Because you can be the greatest expert in a number of areas and still not really have an area where somebody wants to hear what you have to say. A parallel for that, of course, is partisanship, right? You can have all the political science degrees in the world. You could have been elected to a number of positions with the highest vote count. But if the policy du jour that people are interested in is water access, and all of your platform is based on food access, you may not be able to reach that market, right? You're just not selling what people are interested in, right? Is whether it's climatological differences or recycling. If people are really focused and interested in one area, a niche area, all the expertise, all the marketing materials, properly designed website, appropriately scoped and scaled direct marketing, it's not what people are interested in, right? So that needs analysis goes out, where you say, not only what do you need, but what do stakeholders need? What are they interested in today? And to that macro point, checking out the intellectual property to see if somebody's already doing something similarly, not only so you don't infringe, but also if there is something similar, why hasn't it been monetized yet? Or how is what you're offering different? And those broader surveys of research or academic journals where people have looked at consumer spending behavior, where people have looked in that area of your industry, auto manufacturing. Maybe you want to do a car detailing business or a bake shop. What are those details?
You know what's so interesting also about that whole conversation as well is the idea of prior art. And it's such a nebulous term, right? When you're going through the USPTO, right? And I think a lot of it, because it gets really sort of muddled in the world of software and design, right? Because, well, I mean, what are you going to reinvent YouTube, right? Like YouTube technically is a reinvention of any video player you had on your desktop at any given time, right? Really, the power of it was kind of it's not your typical sort of network effect, if you're familiar, which is kind of like social media where you have other people, and it's sort of the idea of continuously having more and more people actually add to the experience, right? In a sense, YouTube also does that, but it's not kind of like your typical platform. But a lot of what these companies have provided is really kind of like a space that a town square that everybody comes to, and all of those atomic interactions are what actually bring the value, not necessarily, oh man, the interface, right? So in the software world, I feel like the lines are kind of like really blurry in a sense. But in the hardware world, the prior art is, and some of the patents are very, very important, right? So this is something that's always sort of racked my brain, and I think a lot of people would be curious about that, right? This concept of prior art. So how much do you have to innovate, right? Like, is there a rule of thumb? Because I think a lot of people don't have clarity about that. And more importantly, like you said, know what you need to do, or know what requirements you need before you decide to go down a certain path. I think it's also important to know, am I going to get sued and get a cease and desist because I went down a path and I wasted 2 years of my life building a hardware device? You know what I mean?
That's a tricky one because we exist in the common law system. So our last vestige of civil law, which is more statutorily guided, is Louisiana. In other jurisdictions and in our federal area of regulation, which the DC Federal Circuit and those areas would oftentimes have original jurisdiction of some of these disputes, there's a lot of sort of subjectivity. There's a lot of qualifications, and it depends. Context is key thinking, where most recently we had an instance where a very popular convenience store with a beaver sued a burgeoning convenience store with an alligator. And most subject matter experts really thought that the beaver had no case, but a jury disagreed. And so, in that sense, depending on your audience, is it a judge or is it a jury? That can influence, even if you've got 80 points out of 100 of similarity, a favorable jury or a judge that's looking for a precise level of infringement could really come out in your favor. So, there is no exact numerical threshold of 20% similarity, 30% similarity. In our common law system, there's a lot of subjectivity, but some of these ideas are also being able to justify, right? So music is a great example of areas where a certain chord progression is difficult to avoid. You've got certain notes, right? Whether it's treble clef or bass clef or tenor clef, you're operating on the same finite scale. There are only so many moves you can make on a chessboard if you adhere to the norms of where the queen can go, where the rook can go, and so forth. So in music, we've had infringement suits where a judge said that something was so readily identifiable as a chord progression from another song as to be infringement, even though you've only got so many letters, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There is no Z in the musical alphabet. There is no L in the musical alphabet. So how do you determine that? And so that's one of the tricky areas, and that's one of the reasons that patent lawyers and intellectual property lawyers make a pretty penny. there is that idea of being able to defend or justify and also show, hey, I've never even heard of this song before coming up with my own song, right? So there are some times where people will say, like, now in modern technology, I can look at your internet search history and go to Google or Yahoo or another search engine and actually sort of potentially subpoena your overall research and discover, yeah, you were looking up this song. And again, I'm a big fan of analogies. You see this in the criminal cases where when the spouse accused of murder has been Googling how much arsenic it takes to, um, it cause the demise of their significant other. Uh, Prosecutors, district attorney's office is sort of at an advantage then with the jury saying, why would you be searching this if you had no intent? So there's a lot of ways where, lack of exposure, if it's an original idea, that context of, hey, I've never looked this up before, I've never heard of this before, I wouldn't be in an environment where this would have influenced me in a direct way, where I would have intentionally or knowingly infringed, that can work to your advantage, as well as the amount, the quantity of the alleged borrowing or similarity. And then finally, that subjective element of what is your advocacy, right? What am I saying as far as, no, Your Honor, this was my intent. This is a chord progression. This is my training. This is how my song came out. Because there are a lot of things I will tell you. My mother, and you can infringe upon yourself. Ask Creedence Clearwater Revival and John Fogerty. So you can infringe on yourself. But my mother hated to listen to U2, even though that's one of my favorite bands, because you can basically play every song over every other song. And so some of these things in the chord progression, it's a different song. Chord progression or usage is the same. So those are tricky. There isn't a hard and fast rule of thumb, but you want to limit as much as possible the similarities, the order of the operations, right? And that goes with patents as far as business processes as well, where you can say, hey, 1357. If everything I do is 1357, it's likely going to be deemed some infringement, as opposed to if my process is 1753, it really could be substantially different. Any baker knows this, right? Any baker knows that the actual rising of dough can be impacted with the type of cut that you make on the dough. It's crazy to me. It makes no sense because I'm not a chemist, but certain processes of heat or actually even processing baked goods can impact the ability of some, or the rising or the ability of something to cook at a certain temperature, despite no rational reason from a non-chemist as to why the same process and ingredients cause a different outcome.
And all that's so fascinating. Funny you mentioned the whole subpoenaing the actual search history. I bet you there's probably a good amount of people who are thinking to themselves right now, like, all right, got to delete all my search history. I mean, we talk about deleting our search history for not nefarious, for not as nefarious things like murder, for example. But I've heard about that situation where, if you're going to do it, right, like at least, people are stupid enough to not at least go on an incognito browser, right? Like where you wouldn't even be able to, you wouldn't be able to necessarily track a lot of that in your direct search history. But with the way that, a lot of our actual browsers work these days, they can see the journey and the progression, right? It could have started with, all right, this was like a murder mystery episode. It gave me an idea. How much does arsenic cost? And a crazy thing I found out also at my time at Texas A&M, I just ordered HCl off the internet. And in my mind I was like, okay, they didn't have me put an ID in, they didn't have me do anything for it, I just bought HCl off the internet. And I was like, I feel like I'm probably on some kind of FBI watch list from here on out. And it was for experiments, right? Like I was doing it, as part of my engineering degree. And I was like, this is really easy, which is cool, I guess, but also kind of scary because it's like, well, anybody can go get HCl, anybody can go get arsenic for science, and so on and so forth. So I appreciate what you've shared there. And when you were bringing up the whole ideas of like the beavers and the gators, I imagined like a jury selection in a courtroom full of a bunch of those people, like kind of just sitting
Yes.
there, like, yeah, we have a jury of our peers, just a bunch of beavers and gators.
Right.
With working through a lot of these elements, I think a lot of people they misinterpret a lot of what is sort of legal in terms of what they can do, right? And what is a lot of this kind of concern as it pertains to today's technologies, right? And I think one of the obviously the most pressing thing of the day, of course, has been AI. Now we're talking about superconductors now more recently, but that a lot of people don't understand the science behind that, so it's not as much in the current consciousness. But a lot of people are scared about AI for a few things, right? There's people who are scared about AI insofar as it will take their jobs. Then they're scared about AI insofar as they can, as you said, there are people who are concerned about the copywriting. And I think that even right now, in the terms of the Hollywood, sort of writer strike, there's people now worried about that and they want to have that as part of the union. So not only has this disrupted things in a lot of different areas, but now you're putting in legal, you're putting in economic ramifications, of course, in the macroeconomic environment. And there's even companies who are building up their entire company around the idea or around other services that they're maybe using from another company. Like, for example, a lot of people built up their company as wrappers of Chat GPT or GPT-4, right? And so what I find to be really interesting is on so many levels, you have a technology that is now kind of pervaded a bunch of different places, and it's now actually having all of these questions in terms of economics, legal, and even just sort of like the social aspect of people being scared of their, losing their jobs and things like that. So, when you're thinking about maybe a technology like that has so many facets, that has this amount of disruption and kind of has tendrils all over the place, when you're working with folks, how do you advise them to really strategize around this, right? Because I feel like even if you're a company that maybe doesn't have necessarily as much technological background, you still need to be aware and figure out maybe ways to use it, because there is a concern you might fall behind. So in your thought process, when you advise folks on all of these different facets, how do you approach something so disruptive?
Right. I mean, foundation of a lot of things that I do is ethics, and that does differ from character and morality. So there are people who take it a step further as to, is this right? Is this just? Unfortunately, I'm just a lawyer. I'm not a priest or a rabbi. So I I focus on what is legal, right? And we've all had the boss who thought they were a lawyer. You can't do that. It's illegal. Is it illegal? Are police going to come get me, or is it against company policy? And you may ask me to go home with my things in a box, because those are two different things. I'm happy to take my things home in a box. I am not happy to eat bologna sandwiches for the next 3 to 5 years. So there is a difference in the legality versus violations of policy, practices, or even best practices, where you say, it's good enough. It's not optimal, but it'll work. So we do want to start with the foundation of ethics in terms of, what are you actually delivering? What are you being asked by your clients, your customers, your stakeholders to deliver? If your customers are paying you a premium to deliver an original piece of artwork, and you use artificial intelligence to draft it and then put your signature on it, is that an honest representation of a custom created piece of art? Can you justify that? In the legal profession, if the chat GPT writes your legal brief and you don't edit it, should you have offer a discount, right? And we even have that debate as far as the area of drafting wills, because wills, for the most part, most people don't have 50 million plus of assets, right? Most people are dealing with a car, a house. It's Texas, so probably a few guns and knives and some silverware. You're using the same template, so your pricing should, like any other entity, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, deal with the R&D element, the time that it took you to go through 3 years of law school, the time and money it took to pass the bar exam, and the time and money it took to develop that template. But it also shouldn't necessarily be an escalating cost for a product that you are using a template. And if you're not creating a custom document per client, why wouldn't, based on economies of scale and other principles of economics, why wouldn't the price go down, right? If you spend less time, if I'm billing you a certain number of hours, but ChatGPT did 50% of that, how do I justify from an ethical standpoint billing you the same rate as me reading through briefs, me drafting and contemplating? So that's one of the foundational things that is more challenging, because different people are going to have different cultural, industry, and other standards, right? We have the model rules of professional conduct in the legal profession that give us guidelines, but even firms are going to have a different idea about what associates or partners should be doing in their operating guidelines. So those areas, are oftentimes going to be spelled out in a way that assists, but there's still development. There's still room for growth as far as our understanding. Another aspect of it, though, is you have to embrace change. Living in a small town, we often fight growth. The growth is inevitable. The technology is inevitable. You can fight the calculator and say, well, people are going to get dumber, or you can say, look, how do we teach people how to check the math of the calculator, make sure they're fluid in the formulas and the processes to reach a correct result, and then give them the tools to be competitive in a global marketplace. Because if it takes you too long to create something, there are people who are going to be willing to pay for cheaper alternatives. I was watching a documentary on a type of craft fabric that's done in India. And even though the fabric lasts longer, the colors are more vibrant with the hand created fabric, not everybody is as interested in that. Some people are interested in the price point. Some people are interested in getting a product tomorrow, right? It's a last minute party. I need this type of dress. I don't have time to wait 3 to 6 weeks for you to hand create it. It's more important to me to have it tomorrow and be less quality at a cheaper price than to wait 3 to 6 weeks and then miss the party entirely. So though all of these factors come into play, but at a certain point, I also remind people that the programming, whether it's biases and prejudices that we found in some AI, comes from the programmers. And you can't really survive without human elements of proofreading and checking. I remember talking with my father one time about a typo in a book, and this is pre-AI. This is the editors not catching something and trying to find something without context. The detective in this story pulls a schnauzer from his pocket. Well, to anybody who knows guns, you say, oh, I think they mean a Mauser, which is a type of firearm. But most people are familiar with the type of dog, and it's a very comical scene to think about. Some detective being in a very precarious situation and pulling a small dog out of his pocket to deal with it, right? Not even a Doberman, right? You're pulling a Schnauzer out. That's your trump card. Okay, that's good call, right? Maybe the Schnauzer will, be too cute and lovable and deter the person you're trying to scare away that way. I don't know. And so you see things like I recently saw the movie Hidden Figures, right? And so some of the areas where they not only are fact checking the math, because the computer can only use the formula, and if the formula inputted, right, garbage in, garbage out. So the humans need to make sure that the proper formula, proper calculations, proper variables are being included so that the machine is doing it. The cake, if it doesn't come out right, probably you forgot an ingredient. It's not that the chemical process has changed. The oven didn't ruin your cake. You didn't set a timer and it burned. Very direct parallel to AI, where if the inputs are not great, if the data isn't correct that you're putting in, you can get those biases and prejudices or incorrect outcomes. And then another facet of the Hidden Figures movie is people were learning new skills rather than doing the skill of checking the math. One of the characters takes her team to learn how to program the computer. So in that sense, rather than fighting something that's inevitable due to efficiency, either A, make sure that your niche market is such that it's a craft product and it's not something that people want a machine to create, right? Like maybe a painting or a composition. And then make sure that you're evolving your workforce to provide the tools, whether it be programming or fact checking or formula checking, to actually add value in that new inevitable technological move. Because if you wait too long, you'll be surpassed. And if you're not evolving, just like with a city, if you're not growing, you're dying. If you're not evolving, you're moving yourself to obsolescence. You're going to be obsolete, and there's no way around it. So I think about the ethical parts. I think about the making sure the verification of validation of the data and the processes, and then also learning how to really use the tool so that as it becomes a more prevalent part of our work, editing, writing, and creating space, we're in a position to offer value and remain gainfully employed through the manipulation and sort of modifications of that technology.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic frame to look at. And what's hilarious too is all the time I actually see a lot of people utilize ChatGPT these days, right? And I've been seeing a lot of examples of people accidentally keeping in as an AI language model, I can't do X, right? And it's everything from like resumes to there was a peer-reviewed paper the other day that we saw where the peer-reviewed paper, it's like the second paragraph underneath the abstract. And I'm like, how did this get into the journal? Right. And I don't think it was even on archive. I don't remember what journal it was in, but it was just like, how do you make that mistake? Right. And so that part of it is definitely more of the dumb aspect of it, like, hey, don't be so lazy that you didn't even like read what you were putting out there, because that's just silly. Watch, I'm probably going to end up accidentally doing that one day or something like that, or something silly like that. But that aspect definitely makes a lot of sense. And you're right, the idea of not being afraid of it, but also learning to adapt. And is it going to be a challenge and maybe in some ways painful to have to adapt a new process, to have to change in such a way where you need to incorporate new elements into your business or into your department, or even what you do on an every day to day? Then yeah, I mean, there is going to be some challenges and some things that you're going to have to do that are different. But embracing that rather than proverbially putting your head in the sand and hoping that it goes away is the best move forward. So but on that note, of course, I know we're running to time here, so I did want to give you the floor for an opportunity to share a little bit more about how folks can work with you, or anything that you want to do promotion wise in terms of sharing anything you're working on. So just wanted to give you a nice opportunity here to share with the folks out there about how they can maybe get in contact with you and gain some of your insights as well.
Well, absolutely, and hopefully, Mike, the FreeFuse platform is going to provide a conduit for people to reach out through email and or other digital means to contact me and ask what services are provided. It's a broad range, and so I provided training for multinational companies in areas of leadership, business communication, and even legal policy drafting. So some strategic planning aspects of that, logistical aspects, operational aspects related to that. I provided CLEs, continuing legal education. So I'm very willing to develop a program and then have it approved by the relevant state bar agencies so that attorneys and accountants can receive credit. We actually, through the University of Houston's system, we did go to the accounting accrediting body to make sure that our ethics component meets those standards that they need. So there is some crossover between lawyers and accountants in that educational aspect. So those CLEs could be drafted. And so beyond the consultancy and the training for accreditation, there's also a service that I work in conjunction with some of my partners to provide baseline scopes of work, basically saying, what is it that you are trying to do? And that could be working with you to develop a scope of work specifically to respond to a public procurement. So some government entity is offering an RFI, RFQ, RFP, and you want assistance sort of honing that, to developing a scope of work for an employment contract, or even a scope of services or boundaries and sort of parameters for a lease agreement. So I do a lot of pro bono veterans work, but I do translate most of those skills in other areas of business development and consultancy.
Awesome. And thank you for that. And of course, as we work with you and many others, we hope to, of course, always create this opportunity to act as a conduit for all sorts of other opportunities. So, I just want to say once again how much I appreciate you for coming on today. And look forward to obviously getting this episode out to everybody else. So for those of you listening at home, thank you so much for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you in the next FreeFuse sessions. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.